Peace be with you. Welcome to another edition of Let the Quran Speak. My name is Sophia. I'm your host. Now, some people have looked at some of the negative aspects of Islam showcased today and have pointed out that Islam is in need of a reformation, similar to the Protestant Reformation, that Islam needs another Luther. And we'll be exploring that question later on in the show. We'll also be taking a look at the fourth pillar of Islam, fasting, and we begin, as we usually do, with a verse from the Quran. This week we're looking at Surah 9, verse 166. And with me today, Brother Shabir Ali from the Islamic Information Center. Brother Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
It's my pleasure to be on.
Now, the verse we're dealing with it recurs, or the message in the verse recurs a few times within the Quran. Is that correct?
Yeah, Surah 7 verse 166 speaks about a community that disobeyed God in a specific way. They were given the Sabbath regulations. Instead of abiding by the regulations, they looked for loopholes around it. There were others who abided by the regulations and warned them against thwarting the law of God, but they didn't listen. And eventually God sent a punishment on the disobedient people. And the verse says that God said to them, "Be ye apes, despised." In Surah 2, verse number 65, we have a similar story. In fact, it's apparently the same story being narrated in a slightly different wording. Yeah. Again, saying that God made an example of them by making them ape-like. And Surah 5, verse number 60, says that there were people who were cursed on the tongues of Jesus and the prophet David, and part of what happened to them was that they were turned into apes and swines.
Mm-hmm. So how are we to understand this verse? I mean, is this a sort of literal? God kind of turned people into animals? How would that work?
Most of the commentators have taken it in a very literal way, but Yusuf Ali, in his translation of the Quran and in his comments notes dealing with that, tends to take a more rational stance towards it. And in fact, this is not only modern, it's quite ancient as well. You know, there have always been people with a variety of, there's always been a variety among people. Some people are more literalistic when they look at texts. Some people look at texts more rationally and try to understand it in a more reasonable way. So Fakhruddin al-Razi, a great commentator on the Quran, in his Mafatih al-Ghaib, which is referred to as the great tafsir, the great commentary on the Quran.
How old is this commentary?
He died in the 7th century, early 7th century. Okay. So his tafsir is from the Middle Ages of Islam. But he makes reference to Mujahid, who was one of the early commentators on the Quran, a student of Ibn Abbas, who said that the proper understanding of this is not that people were literally changed into animals, but that they took on some characteristics that one might describe as animalistic. I guess what he had in mind is almost similar to what we have when we say, this guy is a pig. So we don't mean literally he is a pig. We mean that he behaves in a manner that is not refined. And we say that the person eats like a pig or something like this.
What about the way it's termed, like be ye apes and pigs? Is that sort of translated in Arabic? Because then there are other passages where God says be and then something is.
Yeah, but it could also be in Arabic here that be as. Or be like this in a way. Although literally it is be that, but it could be construed as be as that or be similar to that. And usually when we understand something, I mean, we understand a speech, we have to take into consideration who is the speaker, who is being spoken to, what is expected of us to understand, and so on. So God is speaking in the Quran, and God addresses people and says to them, be apes. Well, does it mean literally they are going to be transformed into apes? Now, God is also speaking to us through the Quran, so he has us as audience, and he knows something about our own mindset and what we might and might not understand. So there are people who will understand it literally, and that's fine. Some people understand it literally, that's good for them. And there are some people who will understand it in a metaphorical sense, and that's fine as well. And it seems to me, though, that if one has the choice, it is better to take the metaphorical understanding. Because to understand that people were changed into apes and swines, we're talking about a historical question here. Should we assert that at some time in history, some people really did get transformed into apes? That will now become an interesting scientific question. But the better way to construe this is that the people then began to develop characteristics which might be described as outside of what would be expected by God from the humans that He created.
When we interpret, do we generally take the interpretation that's sort of less miraculous or less out of the ordinary? Is that
if one has a choice between the two, it seems to me better to take the less miraculous sort of description or explanation of a thing, and that is normal. We use all kinds of expressions which, if one were to take them in a very literal sense, would be ridiculous. But when we use these expressions, we expect that the listener will take it in a reasonable sense. And I believe it's a similar approach we should use when we come to interpreting Scripture. Unless there is something that really requires a miracle, and there are. If we talk about divine involvement in human affairs, at the basis of all religion there is some, whereas in naturalism there is none. In naturalism, what we see in nature, that's all there is to it, and there is no divine being, there are no spirits, there are no angels, and so on. But in religion we affirm these things. But that does not mean because we affirm these things already and we already have a supernaturalist disposition that we should just imagine supernatural things all over the place. I think it is better to work with a basic presupposition that things are happening in a natural way, and when there is a need to say that, well, God has done something specific, we should be willing to assert that as well, and we believe that, but we should not compound the need for faith in what we are saying.
All right, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
When we return, we will look at the fourth pillar of Islam, fasting.